there must be something that Israel does not want the international community to see in Gaza.
We will measure our success not only by the battles we win, but also by the wars we end.
Right now, all eyes are on Washington. But who's actually watching Europe at the moment?
To the Middle East now, and more than 50,000 people have been killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began. That's according to the territory's Hamas-run health ministry.
I'm Venetia Rainey, and this is Battlelines. It's Friday, 29th of August, 2025. Most conflicts in the world involve a level of propaganda, disinformation, lies. As the old cliché goes, the first casualty when war comes is truth. Our job as journalists is to puncture that fog of war and bring you the facts. But with Israel's war in Gaza, that has been difficult. Israel has not allowed international journalists in, apart from rare and highly controlled embeds with the IDF. It has killed, assassinated and smeared Palestinian journalists. Even usually trusted and impartial sources working on the ground, such as the UN and major NGOs, have been undermined, ignored, or accused of anti-Semitism. Disinformation has been rife. We are told we cannot trust death tolls, pictures of starving babies, or videos of attacks on medical workers. It is an unprecedented situation, one we have tried to work through by bringing you different perspectives and sticking to the facts we do have. And yes, Hamas puts out propaganda too, but Hamas is a terror organisation responsible for the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust. Its ministers are not given airtime here in the West, and its lies hold little weight or credibility. We know the unspeakable horrors Hamas committed on October 7th. We will not forget. Israel, on the other hand, is a Western liberal democracy. It is a UK ally. It has a free press and upholds human rights. So on today's episode, we will be looking at Israel's war on the truth. An aid worker in Gaza City will explain how Israel created a famine and tried to blame it on others. The head of a news agency will explain how Israel has killed journalists and obstructed proper reporting. And an information warfare specialist will explain how Israel's supporters have seeded disinformation online.
There is no starvation in Gaza, no policy of starvation in Gaza.
Some of those kids that's real starvation stuff. I see it. And you can't fake that.
It is a famine that asks, but what did you do? A famine that will and must haunt us all.
Let's start with last week's declaration of a famine in Gaza City, which the Israeli army is currently preparing to invade and occupy. The IPC's report said 250,000 people are experiencing famine right now in the area. Two other governorates, Deir el-Balah and Khan Yunis, are expected to follow suit in the coming month. The IPC said there was not enough data about northern Gaza to make a proper assessment, but that conditions there are likely the same or worse. Crucially, the IPC said the famine was man-made. It said it was caused by three compounding factors: the destruction of local farms, bakeries and other food production systems, limits on imports of food and aid, and mass displacement. The IPC, or the United Nations Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, is considered the gold standard for assessing a famine. Its reporting is highly technical, it's detailed, and it's previously been accepted without controversy when declaring famines in Sudan, South Sudan and Somalia in recent years. But this report did not go uncontested. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office called it an outright lie and a modern blood libel. The Israeli Foreign Ministry added that the IPC report is based on Hamas lies, laundered through organisations with vested interests. I spoke to UNICEF's Tess Ingram, who's currently in Gaza City, where famine has been declared. Tess, welcome to Battlelines. Tell me, what sort of things are you seeing in UNICEF clinics at the moment?
I think the best word to describe it is complete desperation. The parents that are there are crowded in swarms around doors, trying to get inside to get help for their children. The mothers and fathers that I speak to are really at their wits' end. They know exactly what is needed for their children. They know that the child needs food or it needs nutrition treatment. But of course, they're really struggling to access these things. And I think that's any parent's worst nightmare, right? Is to watch your child die in many cases in front of you and not being able to do the simple thing that you know is needed to save them. And I'm talking to the nutrition experts at these clinics, the doctors and the nutritionists. They're screening, at the clinic today, they said they were screening between 100 and 120 kids a day. They were getting shockingly high rates of malnutrition among those screenings, 15 to 20%, which is kind of well above what we consider to be famine levels. And you can just see it among the children, really weak and frail children, particularly the youngest children, babies who are not able to breastfeed, infants who are really struggling to put on any weight at all just because they're getting insufficient nutrients from the very little amount of food that there is available to them every day.
Is there one particular story of a child or a parent that you can share with us?
Yeah, I met a mother this morning actually, and she's one of course many children and mothers that I've met over the past week. And she's got a little 8-month girl called Karima, who's been diagnosed with severe acute malnutrition, which is the most serious and life-threatening form of malnutrition. And the mother, Yasmin, has said that she's been trying to continue breastfeeding Karima for the past couple of months, but has really struggled because she herself has malnutrition, and her ability to breastfeed her daughter has basically stopped. And she said, I have not been able to find anything to replace it. She said one day she found a little bit of formula, but it was the wrong age. It was for older children. She's able to give her daughter half a cup of rice a day, and that's her portion that she's sharing with her daughter. And she was crying to me today saying, I'm barely eating, my husband's barely eating, we're giving her a little bit of rice, she just gets sicker and sicker. And I said to her, the world is saying that there's a famine here now, what do you think about that? And she said, it's too late. We've been knowing that this has been happening for months now, and nothing has come to save my daughter. So she's just one of many really heartbreaking conversations that I've had.
There's a few arguments that the Israeli government officials and Israeli public figures have been using to contest the IPC's famine report. And I wondered if you could just talk us through why their arguments are wrong. The first one I want to talk about is that the IPC moved the goalposts to declare famine in Gaza.
That's actually not true. The IPC has had the same standards for how it classifies famine since 2019. And it hasn't changed its protocols. It's used these same standards. There's a lot of technicalities we could go into exactly what those standards are, but the most important thing is that they have not changed.
Yeah, and I think that the numbers bandied around for listeners who have been seeing those is this move from 30% to 15%. But actually, all that's referring to is two different ways of measuring famine in a person's body. One is the mid-upper arm circumference measurement, and one is the weight for height Z-score, and those have different thresholds to meet. It's completely common to use either. The Telegraph has done plenty of reporting on all of that. I'd encourage our listeners to check that out if they want to know more of those details. But as you say, the most important thing to say is that they haven't changed the requirements to declare famine.
It hasn't changed, and that kind of middle upper arm circumference measurement is often one that's used in these sorts of contexts because it's the most frequently available, and it really does link well to what we know when levels of MUAC rise, mortality outcomes rise. So it's globally accepted, especially in conflict zones, because it's easy to train people in how to use it accurately.
One of the other claims that we've seen is around online images that circulate where you see a starving child, someone very thin and emaciated, and then the parent looks less thin, as far as you can tell through their clothes. And people hold that up as evidence that not all of Gaza is starving. What do you say to that?
I think there's two things to say there. The first is that children are more vulnerable to malnutrition than adults. They're more vulnerable because they're growing and developing. We know a child's body grows and changes rapidly. There's rapid brain development going on. It's a very kind of rich and exciting time in a child's life if they're getting all of the nutrients that they need to grow and develop. There's 8 different kinds of food groups. A child needs at least 5 of them to grow and develop well. What we know in Gaza at the moment is children are getting 1 or 2 of those food groups, most often grains or rice. So when that happens, children, because of that rapid growth and development, they deteriorate faster, and they've also got less fat mass. So their bodies are more vulnerable to that deterioration, and it takes them longer to recover as well. And that's often why we see children looking more frail than their parents. And that's definitely not an indication that the parent isn't caring for the child, or that the situation isn't dire. It's just how we see these things unravel. And we always, unfortunately, see children go first.
And I guess among children, it's the vulnerable children who will go even quicker when they're facing starvation. I'm thinking specifically of Mohammed Zakaria Ayoub al-Mutawak, who is pictured on the front page of the New York Times. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, held up his photo at a press conference and said it was fake news. He said his mother was well-fed and his brother is healthy, and that because Mohammed suffers from cerebral palsy, a fact that wasn't initially included in the reporting, the starvation claim is fake.
As you said, children with pre-existing conditions such as a disability or a chronic illness, they're among the most vulnerable in any food crisis, not just in Gaza. And so we know that when children with these pre-existing conditions succumb to acute malnutrition, it is an early warning sign of a broader nutrition emergency. But it's not proof that the wider population is unaffected. Again, this is the most vulnerable group. And I think it also tells us, with consistent access to the food that they need, these children could have lived healthy, fulfilling lives. So both of these things can be true. It can be a child with a pre-existing condition who is also suffering from malnutrition because of the desperate nutrition emergency that they're enduring. So to me, this is not something that should be discounted. And having been on the ground now many times throughout this conflict, including currently in Gaza City, I can tell you that we're seeing many, many children, not just those children with pre-existing conditions, who are suffering from severe acute malnutrition.
What about the Israeli government's charges that, okay, maybe there is mass starvation, but plenty of food has gone in, Hamas is just stealing it, or the UN is refusing to distribute it and it's just stacking up at the border? What does UNICEF say about those allegations?
On the aid diversion, this is something that has been levelled at us many times, that the aid the UN specifically brings in has been taken by Hamas, but no good evidence has been provided of that. We've asked for that evidence to be provided to us, and we haven't received it. And again, as somebody here on the ground who's been part of aid distributions, I have never seen any evidence of that. Of course, we cannot guarantee that not a single grain of rice will end up with Hamas. What we do know is that because of the desperation among the population, we see people taking supplies off trucks as they drive through. And there's also a kind of an organised criminal group trying to take the aid and profit from it by selling it at a higher price in a market. But there is no large-scale diversion of that aid to Hamas. The second claim, that the UN is not doing its job and that we're leaving aid to rot at crossings, is obscene and quite frankly, it's offensive. We're not sitting here with our hands crossed, refusing to do our jobs. We are working around the clock, doing absolutely everything we can, busting our guts. And my own colleagues are hungry and dizzy from the lack of food while they're trying to do this important work. We are doing everything we can to get that aid through. But unfortunately, we face numerous hurdles in doing that work, some of which are placed before us to make the task more difficult.
Is it normal for a famine declaration to be this heavily contested, in your experience?
In other conflicts around the world, there's often consternation at these sorts of classifications. But I think the level of arguing that is going on about it here in this context is unhelpful. We just need to stop arguing and spending time debating the facts, because children are dying. And again, to go back to those parents, imagine being that parent faced with that nightmare of watching your child die before you and knowing that actually just outside of Gaza, people are talking about whether this is true or not. For them, it's so simple. For us, it's so simple. And we need to accept that, I think, as an international community, and just focus on getting the job done to address the problem, which is simply the best answer is a ceasefire. The second best answer is getting food into Gaza so children can survive.
Obviously, in normal circumstances, journalists would just go in and check all of this out for themselves, but journalists are banned from going into Gaza. Local journalists have taken on an extraordinarily high death toll, and so the responsibility for reporting this sort of stuff and getting these stories out has fallen to people like yourselves.
You're right. We do have a dual mandate here, really. We have a mandate to deliver aid to children as UNICEF. That's our job as humanitarians. We also have a mandate to read out what is happening on the ground to the Security Council and to the media, particularly in this case, because, as you say, international media have been banned from entering the Gaza Strip. And really, we're trying to just bear testimony to what we're seeing on the ground in Gaza. There's no agenda here. We're impartial, neutral aid workers who are really just trying to deliver aid and trying to talk about the realities on the ground that we see. So it is incredibly frustrating when, in trying to fulfill those mandates, that we feel, one, like we're repeating ourselves. For 2 years now, we've been talking about the same challenges on the ground, the same horror that these families are experiencing, and asking for the same thing. And yet here we are 22 months later and very little has changed. In fact, the situation on the ground has got worse. And then on top of that, we're told that what we're saying isn't true, which is maddening because we see it every day. I held a child with acute malnutrition today. There is no denying that is true.
What has UNICEF been able to get in terms of aid to help children?
That is part of the good news. We are getting in supplies. Now, to qualify that, it's nowhere near enough. We do need to bring in a lot more aid in order to meet just people's basic needs. For example, we're doing, as the UN and our partners, about 100 trucks a day on a good day, and we need 500 to 600 a day just to meet people's basic needs. And we've proved that that's possible, by the way. It's not a ridiculous ask. We did it during the ceasefire. It's logistically possible. We could do it tomorrow if we were enabled. But at the moment, dozens of trucks a day. UNICEF is bringing in nutrition supplies as a priority. We're bringing in supplies to prevent malnutrition. So for the children who are deteriorating but have not yet fallen off the cliff, we've got supplies to try and help keep them out of the red zone. And then for children where it's too late, they're already acutely malnourished, but we have a window to save their lives, we have treatments. So we're bringing those supplies in, and we're also doing the same for pregnant and breastfeeding women. We're also bringing in supplies for the production of safe water, because water and malnutrition are critically linked. For example, today I met 2 families who have small children who, because they've been drinking unsafe, contaminated water, have parasites in their stomachs and their intestines, which cause them to lose even more weight and make it harder for them to recover from malnutrition. So safe water is key to stop the spread of disease and to stop that deadly cycle between disease and malnutrition. And then lastly, our other focus at the moment is to bring in equipment for hospitals, particularly for neonatal intensive care units. Again, because of malnutrition, a lot of babies are being born early or underweight, and we need to stock these hospitals with the tools that they need to keep those really vulnerable infants alive in incubators. The thing that the parents keep telling me, they keep asking me, is what is the world doing about this? What is happening out there? And I can understand their frustration because, again, as a parent, the solution is simple here. They just need food. They need water. They need medicine. They need nutrition treatments for their children. So I think as an international community, we're all bearing witness to this. Yes, there are claims that it's not true, but I think it's incumbent upon each and every one of us to look at the evidence, to validate what we're seeing, and to do whatever is within our power to support these parents in Gaza who are facing these nightmare decisions. If there was a moment for international action, it is today.
That was UNICEF's Tess Ingram speaking to me from Gaza City. Coming up after the break, I speak to an information warfare specialist about online disinformation and the global news director of AFP about the killing of journalists. It's me, Venetia Rainey. We've just released a mini-series about the rise of China's military, and I think you'll really like it. It's a deep dive into the strengths and weaknesses of the People's Liberation Army under leader Xi Jinping, and what it all means for Taiwan. As the US pivots to the Indo-Pacific, understanding China's armed forces has never been more important. You can listen to all 3 episodes now. Just click the link in the show notes or search Battlelines China wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back. This week, an Israeli double-tap attack on Nasser Hospital killed 20 people, including 5 reporters working for Reuters, Associated Press and Al Jazeera, among others. The second strike came 15 minutes after the first, just as rescue crews and journalists arrived to help evacuate the wounded. It was all captured on a live feed. The attack has created a notable outcry, particularly from the news organisations who lost colleagues. In a letter to the Israeli authorities, Reuters and AP said it raised serious questions, including whether Israel is deliberately targeting live feeds in order to suppress information. A few weeks ago, Israel bombed an entire Al Jazeera team outside a hospital, accusing its lead reporter, Anas al-Sharif, of working for Hamas, but failing to provide proper evidence to support that claim. In total, the Committee to Protect Journalists says 189 Palestinian reporters and media workers have been killed since October 7th, 2023. Leading Gaza to be described as the most deadly conflict ever for reporters. Israel has denied targeting journalists. Phil Chetwynd is the Global News Director of Agence France-Presse, better known as AFP. He leads a newsroom of 1,700 journalists based in over 150 countries. First, it would be great to just get your reaction to the double-tap attack that we saw earlier this week at Nasser Hospital. What's your response?
It's horrific. Obviously, we've seen the images of part of what happened, and the idea that rescue workers and journalists were trying to save their colleagues as a second strike came in is really just unimaginable at this point, and really requires some really very urgent responses from the Israeli government.
And are you confident that you'll get those responses, that the journalist community will get those responses?
We cannot be confident. AFP and various other news organizations were the victim of attack in South Lebanon on October 13, 2023, which killed Issam Abdallah, the Reuters journalist, and very seriously injured one of our photographers, Christina Assi, who had one of her legs amputated and is still struggling to save the second one. We have presented clear evidence to the Israeli authorities about what happened there over multiple periods of time. It's now been 2 years, and we have not had a single coherent response to all our requests. We're told there's an investigation on the way, but in 2 years, we have had not one word from them. So no, it's very hard to have confidence in their processes.
I know AFP chose to take its entire staff team out of Gaza quite early on, right? Why did you guys make that decision?
Well, actually, it wasn't just AFP. It was also Reuters, the BBC, AP. We were all acting together. When you say early on, it was after about 6 or 7 months. Now, if you imagine 6 or 7 months of working every single day, being on the move, losing family members, losing colleagues, searching for food, having your houses destroyed and blown up, that's incredibly intense. And most of our colleagues just were desperate to get out of Gaza, not least to save their families. I think the point that I would often make about the journalists working in Gaza is they didn't choose to go there. It's not like a foreign correspondent where you go somewhere, work, and then you leave. These people are from Gaza. They live there. They work there. But that means they're always surrounded by their families. It could be their elderly relatives, could be their young children. And so, they've always got this responsibility all the time while they're working, also to keep their families safe, to get their families to safety, and in the current context, to find adequate food for their extended families.
So how does AFP now do its reporting? How do you conduct reporting in Gaza?
Yeah, well, as you said, we used to have a staff team of 9 in Gaza. We have an office in Gaza, which has been hit by Israeli tank shell fire, and we have been evacuated. So when we took our people out, obviously that was a process that took some time. It took a long time to get them out. We started to sort of reconstitute a team there with people that we knew, some regular freelancers who already worked for us, so people that we knew, and then our team there who have a lot of contacts, worked to put together trusted people that we know who can work with us. So we've got about, at the moment, 8 or 9 people that we work with regularly in Gaza.
And how do you protect them, given the lethality of this conflict for journalists?
There's a very limited amount we can do. It was the same when it was our staff who were there. We've left protective gear for people, but we know also that in a way that identifies you as being a journalist. And if you fear that you are being targeted, then being identified as a journalist is not a great thing. We can try to give them moral support, public support. That's probably why I'm speaking on this podcast. We can try to give them money to allow them to, buy the food, very expensive food on the black market and so on. But honestly, we can give them very limited support on the ground. They know the ground better than all of us. They're from Gaza. And that is one of the most frustrating things.
Do you think Israel targets Palestinian journalists intentionally?
We have to defer to the serious investigations that have been done by the Committee to Protect Journalists and others. And there are real questions to be raised about a considerable number of attacks. As I said, in the case of our own case in southern Lebanon, it is very clear the group was targeted. Shots fired at them were extremely accurate. And that group was standing on a hill for over an hour, clearly marked press, wearing flak jackets with their vehicles, marked press. There were dozens of drones, Israeli drones, that flew over their position. The technological imprint of the Israeli army is extremely high. So it's very hard to understand how on earth those people could not have been hit unless they were hit deliberately. We have other cases where the Israelis have said they did deliberately attack a car or a vehicle or a tent containing journalists. We had that recently, just last week, 10 days ago, with the death of Al Jazeera's main correspondent and 4 or 5 other colleagues. There were some allegations made by the Israelis which are unproven against the Al Jazeera correspondent, but there was nothing made against the other 4 or 5 colleagues in the tent. So to your question, does Israel target journalists? Well, Israel has openly said that it has targeted certain journalists. So the answer lies there.
And what is the motivation behind it? The motivation behind not letting in international reporters and behind smearing or killing, or as you say, sometimes specifically targeting Palestinian journalists?
Well, what I would say is any time, anywhere in the world, and let's sort of think of any other situation, difficult situations that AFP and other international news organizations have covered in the past, any situation where a powerful authority wants to muzzle international or foreign press coverage or any press coverage of events, it's usually to cover something up. We would say this with the Russia-Ukraine war and our inability to cover the Russian side of the conflict and to really understand, what's going on there. That is something that is proven all over the world. So if you've got nothing to hide, if you're not afraid that something will be revealed, then there's really no reason not to allow journalists into cover. So if you take that logic, there must be something that Israel does not want the international community to see in Gaza. There is obviously immense destruction, and we would have to assume that would be the reason behind. The reason advanced that it is too dangerous, that they can't guarantee our safety. The international media have been covering wars and conflicts, very dangerous ones, for the last 100 years since the Crimean War. We've had people in Syria, we've had people in Iraq, we've people in Afghanistan. So that doesn't really hold unless you're trying to cover something up. So I don't see that as a valid reason or an excuse.
Just finally, what does it mean for our understanding of the truth of what's happening inside Gaza? How is it impacting our ability to understand this conflict?
Well, one of the things that I would say, you mentioned smears. What you hear all the time is an attempt to decredibilize often very brave Palestinian journalists working on the ground. And that means that all the voices coming out of Gaza are in some way being undermined as not proper journalists or not real journalists. And that's incredibly unfair. I would stress we don't get this in other locations. We don't get this in a place like Afghanistan. Our journalists in Afghanistan have never been accused of working for the Taliban. So what it does in a post-truth world, it creates just a general feeling that, we're not quite sure what's going on. You don't have to convince the other side with misinformation or disinformation. You just have to constantly sow doubt. And when you sow doubt, of course, it's enough for people to look away. It's enough for governments and other organizations not to take concrete, serious action, I would say.
Thank you so much, Phil Chetwynd, Global News Director for AFP, for joining us on Battlelines. Finally, I want to dive into the murky realm of online disinformation. The role of the Israeli government is much less clear here than when it comes to denying famine or targeting journalists, but the lies it spreads, there is no starvation, there are no innocent Palestinians, are picked up by Israeli supporters around the world and echo around social media. To find out more, I spoke to Tal Hagin. Tal is an information warfare researcher at Fake Reporter, an Israeli watchdog that exposes foreign influence campaigns and disinformation and provides fact-checking. During the recent war with Iran and the conflict in Gaza, for example, Fake Reporter debunked Iranian state media's false claim about a missile strike near a hospital and corrected the Israeli president after he falsely claimed that a real photo of hungry children in Gaza had been staged. Tal, thank you so much for joining us on Battlelines. Let's run through two specific examples that we've been talking about. The first is a short video of a man called Salim Asfal, we believe, an elderly Palestinian man in Gaza, who you can see is little more than skin and bones. Lots of people were saying that this video was fake because he just looks so emaciated, and I think there were some discrepancies around his hand. Just tell me, what did you do to verify this image?
So when I looked at the image, I saw that everyone was calling the image AI. So when we're looking at AI imagery, it's first important to understand that there are various different types of visual manipulation. There can be outright AI generation, where you put a prompt in it and it spits out a photo. It can be AI splicing, where it'll take a real image or video and then add on to it AI, which is much more realistic the way it looks. It could be Photoshop. And so when I looked at this image, I tried to figure out, what am I looking at here? What a lot of people noticed, and you just pointed out, was the finger. On the finger, it looked like he had another finger growing out of his middle finger, I think it was. And so we know that one of the issues with AI-generated content is that it makes extra fingers. It's not that great with details. And therefore, it has to be AI, right? Well, instead of us rushing to that type of conclusion, we need to ask ourselves, what if it isn't AI? What if there's another explanation for this? And so what I did is I went and I looked for higher definition footage. I wanted to find higher quality. And when I did, I noticed that it was a tiny white mark that was specifically on his middle finger. It wasn't an extra finger. And it moved consistently with him whenever he was moving around. And that was not consistent with how AI usually operates on its own. Another issue that people put out is I think it was his left shoulder, that it looked really, really weird. And it has to be AI because his left shoulder doesn't make any sense. I know anatomy, and that's not how a left shoulder looks. Well, this is where we have to understand our own biases and where our ignorance is. I don't have a medical degree. Maybe he was injured when he was younger, and that's why his arm looks like that. Or maybe it was AI generated. But the point is, we have to understand our limitations. And so when I looked at this photo, I said, well, I don't see any inconsistency with the arm being AI generated, and it's inconclusive why his arm looks like that. So I came to the conclusion that this is very likely to be real. I don't see any manipulation whatsoever. And then, because so many people had talked about this image being fake, the journalists and the people on the ground who knew the person uploaded more photos and videos of him, which essentially confirmed that the person was real. And he did have some type of little white ailment on his middle finger, and his shoulder really was like that due to some type, I think, injury or also cause from the malnutrition.
One of the phrases that I came across while looking into this issue is Pallywood, this idea of a Palestinian Hollywood where Hamas are staging scenes of hunger and there are crisis actors pretending to be dead children. It's obviously something that we came across in the Syrian civil war. There were lots of allegations that there were crisis actors in Aleppo and Homs, all spread by Russian misinformation. And now we're seeing it again here in Gaza. What's your experience of this? Are there scenes that are being staged?
I've followed a lot of different cases where people have made these types of allegations. I haven't seen anything on that level. I see very specific instances where something looks a little bit odd, or certain things are filmed in a certain manner to give off a certain impression, but nothing on the level of crisis actors getting on a TV set and lying about the situation and spraying ketchup on themselves in order to look like they were injured. Something that I think is important to understand within the context of Hollywood is it's a reoccurring theme. You actually just mentioned it with Syria. And I also saw it recently with Israel. After the Israeli-Iranian war that happened, I saw the term Israeli wood, where people were then trying to kind of like turn it on its head from Hollywood to Israeli wood. And they would discuss how, oh, look, they're holding the same child twice. They weren't the same child, but because they look similar, they're all faking it. This building actually was set for demolition. There was no rocket that actually hit the building or the missile. And what it made me realize is that Hollywood or Syria wood or Israeli wood is a symptom of people refusing to acknowledge what they say in front of them. That everything that occurs that is against the way that I view the world has to be fake. It can't be real. If I can't explain it, if it isn't 100% explainable to me, it isn't real. And that is a reoccurring thing that I've seen again and again and again when it comes to different types of concepts like Hollywood.
I want to come back to that again in a minute because that's just such a fascinating and quite disturbing and dark idea that you're bringing up. But first, I just want to understand a bit more who's behind this misinformation. You mentioned grifters. Is there any sense that this is a state-sponsored effort on the Israeli side to debunk ideas of famine in Gaza, or by the Iranian side in terms of Israeli deaths during the Iranian bombardment, for example?
So I can't speak to how much either the Israeli government, the Iranian government, the Hamas government, in terms of funding behind these projects. We do know that, of course, there are different Iranian officials who propagate certain types of ideas, or Israeli government who provides funding to different types of advocacy groups to push certain types of messaging. But one of the reasons, for example, when you discuss the Israeli government and the case of famine, and with the Israeli government pushing the narrative that there is no famine, that it's all fake, is primarily because that's currently what the subject matter is. That is the topic, starvation and famine in the Gaza Strip. And so that's what not just the Israeli government, but also Israeli supporters are going to be focused on. Sometimes when we talk about campaigns, I think that we misuse the terminology, because a campaign a lot of the times insinuates that there is very much a top-down methodology where everyone is sitting in a room. They say, you're going to say this and this and this, and this is going to be pushed out into the group. But a lot of the times it's much more natural. You know, if I'm a pro-Israel supporter and I see Israeli government officials or people pushing out that everything happening in Gaza is a lie, then I'm not going to question that, because that's my side, and I'm going to want to join in on the fight. The same thing with different Palestinian officials, where they will push out certain narratives, or Hamas officials will push out certain narratives, and then pro-Palestinian supporters who support Hamas will then push out the narratives in cohesion because they agree with the message. I've seen this happen behind the scenes, and I've seen this also happening in real time, where when people care about a topic that has to do with what they believe in, they're going to push it out. It might look like it's a campaign, but it's actually much more natural in the way that it goes out.
When it comes to, you know, the Israeli president or the Israeli prime minister holding up pictures of starving children and saying, this is fake news, how do you tackle that?
So when it comes to photos like that, like what recently happened with the president, he specifically put up a photo from the Build article of the aid distribution sites. And he talked about the fact that it was a staged photo from an aid distribution site. When the team at Fake Reporter, we showcased that it was an aid distribution site. That was not true, that it wasn't. And this photographer was simply there before they started handing out the food. When it comes to photos of starvation, them saying it's starvation, I try to be very careful personally about which photos I try to verify, especially when it comes to kids, simply because I don't want to mess up. I don't want even the slightest example that I accidentally dilute or take away from the severity of what that child has gone through. But if I'm able to 100% know that I can debunk these types of narratives, factually speaking, then I will.
I want to talk about another example that you mentioned to me earlier, and that's about Anas al-Sharif, the Al Jazeera journalist who was killed in a targeted assassination by Israel earlier this month, along with several of his colleagues. Israel repeatedly said that he worked for Hamas, both before his death and after his death. He denied that while he was still alive, of course, and Al Jazeera has repeatedly denied that since his death. But one of the bits of evidence held up online to support Israel's claim was that he posted on October the 7th on Telegram to cheer on Hamas militants as they conducted their awful massacre in southern Israel. Some on the Palestinian side claimed that that was faked, but you debunked that. Can you explain how?
Yeah, so I saw that everyone was talking about these messages. Of course, there was a lot of different types of evidence that were being put out there. There were the messages of support, which that's how they were viewed, support for Hamas and what they had done on October 7th and afterwards via Telegram. When it comes to al-Sharif's alleged affiliation with Hamas, and that was based on documentation that was showcased by the IDF, which there's nothing really I can do with that. I mean, that's documentation that the IDF has. There's no way for me to verify that independently. And so there's nothing I could do there. And so when it came to the messages, I was curious, did he actually say that? So I looked through his Telegram channel, and it's true that it doesn't appear in his Telegram channel. But then I found that that connected to Anas al-Sharif's Telegram channel was the comment channel that is directly connected to his channel. And when I went to that channel, I found that the message was still there. And I was able to verify that it had been deleted by looking at other messages that had been deleted from his main channel, but still appeared on the community commentary channel. And so that's how I was able to verify indeed that the message is real, that it did exist. Now, what does that mean? For me, it doesn't mean anything. It just means that the message was verified, and then I put it out there that it was verified, and then people can use it how they wish. Now, something happens with this type of verification that is important to understand. I think it's a learning lesson for people. The narrative became that this message from Telegram justifies him being killed. And then Palestinians, pro-Palestinian activists who uploaded that claim, what they essentially did is say that this message is fake because if this message is real, then it justifies him being killed. That's how I read it, and that's how most people are going to read it. And so when I fact-checked that verification of that specific Telegram message, and they were called out on lying about it, it didn't matter afterwards that they said that it doesn't matter what he wrote, it doesn't matter if he supported Hamas, he shouldn't have been killed anyways. The entire message that they were trying to push is completely diluted by them pushing a fake story as the title of their claim. And this connects to a bigger thing that I think is very, very important to take into account, is every time you make a statement, every time you push out a certain type of narrative, you need to verify everything you're saying. Because the degree of everything having to be 100% correct is so important nowadays, because even if you make one mistake, anything you do that is wrong is seen as malicious. And so this should be a learning experience that when you're trying to push a certain type of narrative, understand the consequences if what you're saying is not true, and verify what you're saying before you push it out there.
Does it worry you that the Israeli government, the Israeli army, various Israeli officials are sharing fake news, potentially in the knowledge even that it's fake, just to support their narrative, that their war against Hamas is justified? I'm just wondering how you feel about that as an Israeli citizen.
I think it's less relevant to me being an Israeli citizen. I'm not my government, and I represent myself, and that's how I've always seen it, and my loved ones, and not by a government entity. And what I'm more concerned with is that I think that it's, when I look at the Israeli government, when we look at people in power and we look at who holds those positions of power, we hope that they are the best of the best, that they are the ones who are representing our country, who are representing the needs, to make sure that my taxes are lower, to make sure that my country is safe, to make sure that we are doing things by the book. And when I see government officials or military leaders publishing things that I'm able to debunk, and I don't have the knowledge and the capabilities that many of these people have, and I'm able to debunk it, that's a very scary realization to me. That the people in charge, the people who are actively paving the way for the agendas within the Israeli government, don't know how to do basic verification. And that tells me that they're operating based on warped realities in front of them. And that's very concerning.
One last question. What reception does your work get? I presume it's very unpopular on all sides when you're debunking or verifying something that the others want to believe is true. How has that affected you? What kind of reception does your work get?
The reception to my work really depends on what I'm debunking that day or what I'm verifying that day. So if the content that I analyze gives a pro-Israel, like a win for the pro-Israel crowd, then I'm called a genocide Zionist supporter. And if my work comes out, debunking something that supports the pro-Palestinian agenda, then I'm a Hamas-loving terrorist. That's usually the type of reception that I get when it comes to these types of pieces. And a lot of the issue is also assumptions that are made. When I always try to have that my work doesn't have an agenda behind it. And what I mean by that is that when I verified that the image of the old Palestinian man was not fake, it was real. Or when I verified that the journalist Al-Sharif's message was real and not fake, there is no commentary behind that. I'm not trying to tell you anything, but people assume there is. Oh, so you're saying it's good that they killed him. Oh, you're saying that there is starvation in Gaza. No, I'm not saying either of those things. All I said is what you can read in the text, which is this and this. And that is something that is a big issue also that I've noticed, which is that people make these assumptions about everything. If you say one thing, then you have to believe in something else. And so I usually do get hatred across the board, depending on what I post, but I also get a lot of empathy and support. I have pretty famous, well-known journalists and activists from the pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian scene that reach out to me privately for verification, for help analyzing content. And so I see that beyond the shouting match of social media, the people I would say who matter, who actually make changes on the ground, they reach out for help and they see my work for what it is, as the tool for them to be able to, for their work. And that's how I see myself, as someone who is there to help verify the information. What happens with that information isn't up to me. And so I would always define myself as I'm the person who creates the tool, and it's your job to use the tool. How the tool is used is not up to me.
That was Tal Hagin from Israeli watchdog Fake Reporter. That's all for today's episode of Battlelines. We'll be back again on Monday. Until then, goodbye. Battlelines is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Knowles and hosted by me, Venetia Rainey, and Roland Oliphant. If you appreciated this podcast, please consider following Battlelines on your preferred podcast app. And if you have a moment, leave a review, as it helps others find the show. To stay on top of all of our news, subscribe to The Telegraph, sign up to our Dispatches newsletter, or listen to our sister podcast, Ukraine the Latest. You can get in touch directly by emailing battlelines@telegraph.co.uk or contact us on X. You can find our handles in the show notes. The producer is Max Bauer. The executive producer is Louisa Wells.